I'm curious, guys. You talked a little bit about your background and some of the challenges with building the program. Pedro, you didn't have much background in compliance per se before you joined Torneos. And Facundo, your background was as a compliance official at a large US multinational. Neither of those two situations describe what you encountered when you joined Torneos. So when you show up at Torneos and your mandate is to start from scratch to build a compliance program for a company that is essentially, and it's, of course, it's across the region, but it's essentially an Argentine company whose shares are not traded in the United States. At the time, you had no or very little business in the United States. How do you think about, the shape and size of the compliance program given Torneos' position and the market? And, what resources did you use to figure out how to build a program that was appropriate for the type of company that Torneos was in the Argentine market? Did you benchmark against what other companies were doing in Argentina, or did you have some other framework in which you thought about how to design that program? How did you know there needed to have an ethics hotline? How did you know what policies and procedures to implement vis-a-vis what other companies were doing at the time in Argentina?
Good question. So of course, I mean, it was the first thing we needed to decide, right? And we relied heavily on our external counsel for that, I would say, both in Argentina and in the US. This, as you mentioned, this still is a for the most part an Argentine company, right? So we didn't have operations in the US. We of course used accounts in the US, and so yes, there was a contact, but we didn't have any. So what we did is, while in the process of the investigation and knowing that we were a target of the investigation, the decision was to use the standard of the US regulation to build our program, and of course to adapt that to Argentina as much as we could. But what we decided is we're gonna build a program following the US standards for those programs, and we will incorporate whatever needs to be incorporated from a local point of view. And so that is why we used also our local advisors. But the driving force was trying to do what a US or multinational company would do in terms of creating, in terms of the elements that the program would have. For example, in terms of reporting, in terms of how we will staff that, and what type of resources we will devote to the program. So yeah, that was the first approach. And then in terms of how we would build it, again, we use the standard, the US standard, for example, with our code of conduct. We basically took one of our main shareholders is AT&T, right? That's public information, so no problem there. So what we did is we took the AT&T code of conduct and we basically adapted to a Argentine sport marketing services company, and try to and that is how we come up with our code of conduct. And then we look into the regulations and we look at the elements that the DOJ would identify as those that needed to be found in a compliance program, and we built all of those. So again, the reporting, the staffing, the hotline, the terms of budget that we devoted to it, and we maintain that. So again, we decided that we were going to use the standard of a US compliance program, and we adapted that as much as we can, keeping all those elements. And of course, the standard, of course, of that is higher than the standard here in Argentina. But we were going to go with that standard. So we will continue to try to set that standard in terms of what we do. And of course, we include and we embed into that whatever needs to be done in terms of Argentina and other countries where we also operate while we, I don't know, produce a soccer match or Olympics or whatever it is. Part, I think, one of the challenges was that was in within the context of the DOJ investigation. So we needed to comply with the U.S. standards, best practices, and of course with the DOJ expectations into the design and implementation of the compliance program. One tool that was very, very helpful, and at the very beginning we did it kind of more intuitive, was kind of we designed kind of a risk matrix. At the very beginning was part of the really understanding of the operations of the company. We walk, we discuss, and with every operation and every areas of the company, not only at senior level, but mid and more production employees level as well, to understand what is the specific production and the specific needs of the company. And then we start engaging the program based on that. Kind of the risk matrix, it should be kind of a document that it's a comprehensive document, the holistic one that will contains all the operations of the company, the way how the compliance program mitigate any risk, the approach and the approaches that is taken by the compliance department in order to maintain the program and to enhance the policies. Back in time, we started, as Pedro mentioned, with one code of conduct and kind of a set of basic policies, gift and hospitality policies, conflict of interest, and a due diligence procedure. And then we started building on the specific needs. We aim to do a tailor-made compliance program, and we start creating new policies and procedures on what we learned on the operations of the company. As I pointed, that was in the middle of the investigations, and we needed to comply with several standards. One of them was the DOJ, and back in time with the investigation.